Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Welcome back to the program. Our guests from Murphy Batista LLP of Vancouver and now Kelowna personal injury firm, lawyers Scott Stanley and Bill Dick. And gentlemen, wanted to talk about this. We mentioned it just before the break. Big headline story, I believe it was the province, a few days ago, about fraud and fraudsters and how much, ICBC premiums just went up a couple of days ago and everything else went up. And so we see these headlines and go, oh, well, I guess this is this propaganda? Is this their way of going, now you know why we've just raised your premiums? Look at the front page of today's paper. We're getting ripped off every time we turn around. So how much truth is there, Scott, to this sensational headline about ICBC and fraudsters?
Well, I think it'd be naive for anyone to think there is no fraud in the system.
Absolutely true.
I've done this work for 20 years, and both plaintiff and defense, and I've maybe seen 3 or 4 cases out of thousands that I felt were not true, that were fraudulent. And so I think it's very, very low. And I think things like that, it's certainly not worthy of front page news, in my view. And I truly think that things like that are done to perhaps taint the jury pools in Vancouver, in British Columbia.
Interesting.
Because,
speaking of premiums going up, if there's a jury of your peers sitting in their box opposite you, and they all drive cars, and suddenly you're partly responsible for their premiums being increased, well, how do you think they're going to feel about you?
Well, the minute anyone asks for money, which is what you're doing when you're asserting a claim, people are skeptical.
Sure.
And they're even more skeptical if they think it's going to cost them money, because out of 8 jurors, I'd imagine that between 5 and 7 have ICBC policies.
Of course.
And if they've heard all these exaggerated news reports about fraud and how much it's costing the system, they're probably going to be a little bit more inclined to scrutinize a person than they might otherwise.
Bill, what happens to a lawyer who takes a fraudulent case and advances it, who knows that these people are rip-off artists, but you know what the heck, I'm in for a good slice of the action, so I'll run with it. What happens to that lawyer when this whole thing shakes out and these fraud artists are caught and busted?
Well, we do have ethical obligations as lawyers, not to, for example, if we are told by a client that they're going to lie, when they take the stand, and the client lies, we have an ethical obligation to recuse ourselves from the trial.
Okay.
So there are very significant ethical obligations that our lawyers are bound by. Mm-hmm. In terms of, there are certainly times when you wonder whether your clients are possibly exaggerating a claim or not, but that's not, your job isn't to scrutinize those people in terms of whether they're telling the truth or not. It's only when you know that they're not telling the truth when you have a real ethical dilemma as a lawyer.
Right. Okay.
And it's up to the defense side and the other to expose if they are. And your job is to advocate on behalf of your client. Mm-hmm. My experience, just like Scott's, is that the vast majority of our clients have legitimate and absolute legitimate injuries, and all they're looking for is to get fair compensation at the end of the day.
And I couldn't agree with both of you more. And this is why I brought this up in this conversation, because as I said a few minutes ago, it was hardly news. There are cases of fraud approaching ICBC all the time, but this sensational front page story and blah blah blah. I mean, it was quite unnecessary, I thought, and unreflective of what really goes on 364 other days of the year.
Well, I think that story, a lot of the fraud that they were referencing was that which relates to material damage, like people submitting fraudulent invoices to ICBC for the repair of their cars, repair shops and things like that.
Oh, sure.
I can't comment on that at all. I don't know what goes on there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, to echo what Bill says, in order for a claim of any magnitude, that's allegedly to be fraudulent, it would have to be run through a lawyer. And as a lawyer, if you know your client is not going to tell the truth, you simply cannot put them on the stand, because when a lawyer puts anyone on the stand, you're vouching for their credibility.
Right.
And you're simply not able to put anyone on the stand. You cannot prosecute a claim that you know to be fraudulent. So any claim that is fraudulent wouldn't have a lawyer behind it. It just simply couldn't have one.
One of the things that you and I have discussed in the past, Scott, and I've talked about it with both Joe Murphy and Joe Batista, is your firm it takes over a lot of cases. You assume cases that were begun by other lawyers where maybe a mistake was made, maybe the lawyer was just out of his or her depth, and the case arrives at your offices. How frequently does this happen?
It happens rather frequently. I personally, about 30% of the cases that I handle are cases that I take over from other lawyers, and that varies throughout the firm.
Now, are they referrals, Scott, or is the client, if they come to you going, well, the last guy didn't do a darn thing for me, how about you? Can you do better?
Usually it's client initiated, and when they come to us, I mean, we're not going to take a case unless we feel it's in the client's best interest. If there's a simple misunderstanding between the lawyer and the client, we're going to want to send them back to the lawyer with some ideas about how they might repair the relationship. It's only if we feel that we can do a better job in things that should have been done that haven't been done, that's the only time we're going to look to take over a case from another counsel.
Okay, Bill, I wanted to come back to something you were talking about earlier about contingency fees. This is where the rubber meets the road for a lot of would-be clients. How do you get paid, and how does it work? So in a personal injury case, does a contingency fee means that if your client wins some kind of award, you receive a percentage of that?
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. And I think it was in the late 1980s that our law society allowed contingency fees. Up until that point in time, we didn't allow them at all, and so you would have to pay an hourly rate. I can't afford myself on an hourly rate, so in order to provide sort of better access to lawyers is for example, in a motor vehicle claim, you can, as a lawyer, you can charge your client 33 1/3% of whatever the amount is that's ultimately awarded. So the client doesn't have to pay any money as you go along for your hourly rate. It's just whatever ultimate amount you are able to get for your client, the lawyer charges. And lawyers charge different rates.
These fees are set by the law society?
There's a maximum that they can charge. And it just provides clients with more access to lawyers.
Right. And Scott, here's something that I wanted to talk about Murphy Batista about specifically, and you've alluded to it already, the resources available to the firm. If a person is in an accident and severely injured, that person's life basically stops in terms of their ability to produce income and cash flow and all of the rest of that stuff. But they've still got bills and kids and lives and all of that stuff going on. So how does the firm support someone once they accept the case of getting through? Because some of these cases go on for years and years.
Sterling, not only does the injured person's life stop, but those that he or she cares about, it affects them as well. Parents of severely injured children, they have to keep a vigil by the bedside, right? So long before we ever turn our mind to determining how much money the case is worth, we're going to focus on trying to help this family get their life back. And that can mean anything. We've had an instance where a client, she didn't have anybody, but she had her dog. And her family basically took her dog and they wouldn't give it back. And so we actually hired a private investigator to go get this dog back. And so whatever needs to be done that'll bring comfort and help bring about a restoration of this person's quality of life, whether it's from a rehabilitation point of view, from a financial point of view, a social point of view, we want to focus as much resource as we can on that long before we're ever looking to resolve the case.
Right. Okay. And that's an important thing to know, because Bill, even that a young couple that you talked about at the beginning of the program with their liability issues, and then they ended up going to the Court of Appeal, and then beyond that they had another hearing and round of a session for awarding damages. These things don't happen overnight. They go on forever and a day, don't they?
No, it's funny because I think a lot of people imagine our court system to be like the States and on television.
We watch too many American law shows. You're absolutely right.
Someone comes into your office and the next day you're in trial.
Right.
That just doesn't happen. These things take time, and a lot of times as lawyers, it's about managing your client's expectations in terms of that timeline.
Right.
They sometimes do take years, and it can be very difficult on people financially. It can be difficult on them emotionally. And so we have to do whatever we can to ameliorate that as best we can.
Personal injury law firm is Murphy Batista LLP. The Vancouver phone number is 604-683-9621. And now we got to do the toll-free thing for you, Bill, because you just got that Okanagan office opened up. So that number is 1-888-683-9621, the same as the Vancouver number with a 888 up front. Right. Good of you both to stop by this morning. Thank you so much. Great discussion. Enjoyed it immensely.
Thanks, Sterling.
Yeah, thanks, Sterling.
We'll see you next time on The Law Show.